Small business war stories. Small businesses are the soul of America. And this is where they tell their stories. I am your host, Pablo Fuentes. Hey, lovers of small businesses and good stories in general. Welcome to episode 96 of Small Business War Stories. And today's a really cool episode. I got to meet somebody whom I've learned a lot from, Ryan Deiss of Digital Marketer. And I met Ryan originally. Well, I saw him speak at the Traffic and Conversion Summit out in San Diego. He is a digital marketing expert. But I had this really unique opportunity to sit down in a room for a couple days, learning from Ryan directly at a place called the Wizard Academy out in the Texas Hill Country. And during that seminar, I had the opportunity to sit down and interview him about some really, really cool, fascinating tactics for small businesses to tell their story and to disseminate their story. So if you want to understand, basically in plain English, how to get started, how to excel at digital marketing for your small business, you have to stick around for this episode, again recorded at the Wizard Academy up in the Texas Hill Country. Without further ado, let's get into today's episode 96 of Small Business War Stories with Ryan Deiss of Digital Marketer. And we are live here in the beautiful Texas Hill Country. And today we are at the Wizard Academy, and I have the honor and pleasure to sit down with Ryan Deiss, who is the founder of Digital Marketer, amongst many other businesses.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and Ryan, I first came across your stuff through, you have very informative, helpful videos, a lot of free content out there to help people understand how to market in a digital world. And you also, I attended your conference, the Traffic and Conversion Conference in San Diego, which is tremendously helpful. And that happens every February, right?
Yeah. Traffic and Conversion Summit every February, generally, unless we forget to book something and then it's in March. But generally, we've gotten pretty good. It's generally in February. And we're coming up on our 10th year, so I've been doing it for quite a while now.
That's awesome. Congratulations. Yeah. Last year was my first year, hopefully of many.
Appreciate that. And
we are here at the Wizard Academy, which is a special place. It's kind of like a specialty business school, if you will. And you just taught a class teaching people from all over the country how to do digital marketing for their business.
Yeah, it's a Wizard Academy is a business school for misfits and artists and things like that. It's I'm honored to serve on the board here. It has nothing to do, if you're wondering, with magic or wizards or anything like that. Really, the name itself is kind of a type of marketing that maybe we get into, maybe we don't. But yeah, it's a cool place. Check it out, wizardacademy.org.
Yeah, and there's like statues of Don Quixote everywhere, and there's like a mythology of the place in terms of being like the dreamer. Sometimes I feel like Don Quixote is an entrepreneur, fighting the windmills.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's. I think there are certain character archetypes that entrepreneurs are going to resonate with, and you definitely see those out here, in part because the place was founded by an entrepreneur. Founded by a business owner, Roy Williams. So yeah, it's a cool place.
So I would say the two biggest, we've been here for 2 days and a grand total of probably close to 20 hours, learning a lot of stuff. But if we were to condense it into a short podcast, the two biggest things that were important for me were, one is how to tell a story and the idea of a character diamond and how your business has a character diamond. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
And the second one is you gave a lot of really powerful tactics today that would be impossible to cover all of them, but maybe condense some of that.
Yeah.
But what is a character diamond, and why does your business need to have one?
Yeah. So I mean, I think first you need to acknowledge that most companies. I'm going to use the term brand, but that means so many different things to so many different people. So a lot of times when people think the term, they hear the word brand, they think, oh, you're talking about your logo or your style guide or something like that, right? And that really isn't actually what a brand is. My favorite definition of a brand is what Jeff Bezos says, which is your brand is what people say about you when you aren't in the room. Mm-hmm. And what Roy Williams, author of the Wizard of Ads books, person who really founded this place, what he taught me, and what was part of the curriculum while we were here, is that actually, a brand is a fictional entity. We forget that sometimes. We forget that a brand is a fictional entity. Now, don't think that fiction means it's untrue. Sometimes fiction is more true than real life, right? Mm-hmm. But if we approach brand as a fictional entity, if we say really a brand is kind of like a movie character, right? It's a character from film. It's a comic book character kind of thing. Then what that does, it causes us to ask the question, well, okay, then how are fictional characters created? And what's so cool, and this is what I love about this place in particular, right, is they ask questions completely from a sideways, non-linear thing and wind up at really, really cool conclusions. So if we start with the thing that really, a brand is a fictional character, it's not just a logo, right? It needs to be personified, all these different aspects of it. How are fictional characters created? Well, that's a known thing. That's known. Fiction writers, screenwriters, they know how to create fictional characters. It's a process.
There's a formula.
Yeah, there's a formula.
To be honest with you, I guess to some, subconscious extent, I must have been aware of the fact that there was a formula. But there's a very clear formula, like the same way that there's like, here's how you bake a cake.
Exactly.
Here's how you make a character.
Yeah. If you go to film school or you take any really advanced creative writing, there's a good chance that you will learn about character diamonds. Right. The character diamond is the formula, is the framework, it is the model for crafting a fictional character. And you could Google it, character diamonds. Roy, me, nobody here, claims to have invented the concept. What we've done is we've said, this thing that just works, that's just kind of understood at creating fictional characters, can also work at creating a brand. Mm-hmm. Now, the mistake that people would make is they'd say, okay, well, I want to create, if we're going to create a fictional character, then, I want to be Superman. I want to be,
Conan.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to be like the most powerful thing in the world. And then there's two mistakes with that. Number one, whatever character you create needs to be consistent with who you are as a company. So it's important to, look at the founders of the company or whoever's most visible in the company and to say, what character traits do we generally share? What values do we have? And one of the ways that you can look at that is to say, what are my favorite books from, or what are, my favorite books, what are my favorite TV shows? What are the characters from those shows? What are their character traits, right? Because very often if there's a character that you really admire in a book or a film or a TV show, the reason that you like that character is because you see traits in that character that you kind of admire in yourself.
Sure.
Right? So we can begin to unpack this and just say, okay, what is, if we look at any great character, there's one North Star. There's one just obvious trait that anybody would point to and be like, okay, that is a defining characteristic, right? So if it's Superman, it's a Superman, right? You're talking about this person who's able
Man of Steel.
Yeah, Man of Steel.
Fly.
Leap tall buildings, can fly, right? Spider-Man, it's a Spider-Man, right? Some are more obvious than others. If we think about Sherlock Holmes, right? Sherlock Holmes is a crime-solving genius, right? Like just an absolute savant, right? So that's the most obvious character trait. Your business, your brand is going to have something about it that's obvious. Now, I'm not talking about unique selling proposition. This is when people get sideways. Like, well, our unique selling proposition is our stuff is green and everybody else's is red. Like, that's not it, right? It's really what about, your brand, what about your company really defines who you are. Mm-hmm. The thing that people, would see, what is that, right? If you were to draw out a diamond, that would go at the top. So if you're a baseball fan, right, that's second base. That's the North Star. That goes at the top. Now, what we need to say is, okay, what's going to balance this thing out? Because if you only have one character trait, that's like the definition of being a one-dimensional character.
Right.
So if Superman, for example, is, Man of Steel, bullets are bouncing off his chest, he's flying when he wants to, laser beams out of his eyeballs, essentially, undefeatable, right? That's not that interesting. It's like that there's no drama because there's no conflict, right? So what we want to say is, what's a counterstar? We know the North Star. Now, what's a counterstar? How can we begin to build in some conflict? And for Superman, it's a susceptibility to kryptonite, right? Okay. There's this substance that could do it.
Maybe the relationship with Lois Lane?
Well, so I'll come back to that, right? Because that was added later. Like what you just said was very introspective and a really good insight, but that would show that you maybe were started consuming Superman stuff in the 80s, for example, when screenwriters got a hold of it. So that's a good observation. We'll come back to that. So let's think about Harry Potter, right? A wizard who's a boy, right? I mean, you think of wizards as being kind of this all powerful, but now this is kind of like this child, so a child wizard. You saw a similar character in Spider-Man, right? Where it's a Spider-Man who's actually a teenage boy. Right. So with Sherlock Holmes, right, it's somebody who's this amazing genius who's kind of a dysfunctional human being, like an asshole, right, and doesn't really get along with people, just a jerk, right? That conflict is what makes characters interesting. Without conflict, you have there's nothing interesting about it, and we want to see conflict there. So That conflict, the North Star and the counter star, that's what creates interest. So if you want an interesting brand, you have to have an interesting character. So what is that for your brand? Begin to plot it, right? Begin to think about it. Now we got to ask ourselves, okay, what's the hill that we're prepared to die on? What is our non-negotiable? That's kind of what goes over into first base, right? The right hand, part of the diamond. Every business needs to stand for something, right?
And let's make a quick distinction. How's that different from the North Star? Because I think I was initially a little confused about that.
Yeah. So North Star can have a lot of meanings. North Star is just the most obvious external character trait, right? And so for Superman, it's and I get what you're saying, right? Because the idea of, this is my North Star, this is what guides me. It's a bit of a mix of metaphors. So maybe you can replace North Star with the most obvious character trait, and then the one on the right with the hill that you're prepared to die on. That's your non-negotiable. So for Superman, it was truth, justice, and the American way. For Spider-Man, it's the protection of the innocents at all cost, right? Any Spider-Man comic book or movie, he's got like he's saving a school bus load of kids, with one web, and then he's got, holding like his girlfriend with the other one, right? He's always trying to protect innocent people.
Sure.
With Sherlock Holmes, it has everything to do with the puzzle must be solved. He doesn't have any sense of justice like Superman. He just wants to solve the dang puzzle. Right? The puzzle must be solved. So thinking about that, like, what is the hill that you're prepared to die on? What's your non-negotiable? What are you unwilling to waver on? That point is what builds trust, right? So we talked about the, kind of second base, home base, like that kind of north-south. That conflict is what creates interest. So you have an interesting character, but until I know where you stand, I don't trust you, right? So once I know the hill that you're prepared to die on, now I trust you. Funny enough, I can even disagree with you, right? So that's when you make it clear, here's what we believe. This is what we believe to be true about the universe and our place in it, right? That's our non-negotiable. So being clear on what you believe and making that known. A lot of brands actually are getting better at that today.
Yeah. I mean, Ben and Jerry's is one that comes to mind of something like they're very much about.
Ben and Jerry's, think about Tom's Shoes. I mean, a lot of these brands that are uphold as being more benevolent, right? They've got this thing that they're very much for, right? So thankfully, brands are getting better at that.
Some of they don't necessarily have to be for benevolent things, right? They can be like, some brands have a dark edge.
Yeah.
Like, think about Harley Davidson, very well-known brand, has a little bit of a dark edge, and the hill they're ready to die on.
Yeah.
It's like,
rebel.
Freedom and rebel.
Yeah, freedom and rebelliousness. You could also, the hill you're prepared to die on could be standing fervently against something. Right? So there's a lot of things there. The point is, you got to plant a flag, right? There's got to be something, or if you're wishy-washy, I don't trust you. You stand for nothing, nah. The one that most brands in particular have a hard time with, and the one that truly made... So did you read comic books as a kid?
I grew up in Chile, and I read some comic books,
Okay.
Not as many. The culture for comic books wasn't as prevalent as
fair enough. So in the 1960s, that was when Marvel comic books, like Marvel had, X-Men and Spider-Man, and a lot of people know Stan Lee, right? Stan Lee created these characters.
Right.
Marvel comic books came out of nowhere and essentially just pummeled DC Comics. And DC Comics was the king. DC had Superman, Batman. I mean, it had all the big, characters, right? Stan Lee came out of nowhere and just crushed them because he did something that DC wasn't doing. He gave all of his characters a flaw, a character flaw, a personality flaw, right? That is third base. That's the left-hand side of the diamond. What is your flaw? What is your weakness? What is your vulnerability, right? That is the thing. So for Spider-Man, he harbored intense guilt because his Uncle Ben died, right? You mentioned Superman. Superman didn't really have a flaw. Superman was, Superman. There was the kryptonite thing, but that was more just to balance off the fact that, he can be killed.
Yeah.
And then Truth, Justice, and the American Way. It was in the 1980s when they began making Superman movies that the screenwriters said, this person's kind of boring. Not really human, too alien-like. What do we do? Oh, let's make him bad with women. right? Let's make him socially awkward. And that's where kind of the dopey thing, it came out of when the screenwriters who understand this, either, they understand the formula because they've been taught it or just intuitively they get it,
right.
That they added that element. And then it kind of was brought back into the comic books. If you read, and I go to comic books because comic books are so great at creating characters. But if you think about, let's go back to Sherlock Holmes, right? He was a drug addict. That was his flaw. That was his weakness. That was his vulnerability. And so this is the thing that most brands won't do. This is the thing that most brands, what's your flaw? It's like they're in a freaking job interview. We just care too much. Shut up. No, you don't. Think about a brand like Apple, right? Which tragically, in my opinion, isn't as strong a brand as it once was in post Steve Jobs, because I don't believe they truly codified this, and I don't believe they've carried it forward. But one of the things that kind of made Apple charming was they were sort of the arrogant nerd. Like that arrogant, nerdy guy who's like, yeah, I know I'm smarter than you, I'm better than you. Oh, you don't get it? Shut up. I don't care. You think about Steve Jobs. He literally told all of his customers, right? I think it was the iPhone 3 that came out and the antenna didn't work. You're holding it wrong, right? This is not the same like warm and fuzzy customer centricity that we see from a lot of brands today. We forgave him because it was consistent with all the other things. We've actually seen that character before. And that's the fascinating thing. When you really get into this, you realize so many of these character archetypes, they've existed so many times. So there's a couple of ways that you can play this. You can begin to map your own diamond based on the personalities of the people who are there, the founders. What is it that you want to codify and carry forward even after you're gone, right? And after you're gone could mean you get hit by a bus, or it could be an IPO or something like that, right? Maybe a sell. But if you want to see it move forward and not lose its luster, if you want to see it move forward and not become this soulless brand, if you ever want to be able to step away, you need to do that. And so you could begin to plot, who are we? And then ask yourself, okay, what character from movies, film, TV, comic books, Bible stories, anything, does this kind of begin to look like? And then what you can say is, oh my gosh, our brand is Shrek. Our brand is Spider-Man. Our brand is Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes.
You can work on it backwards like that?
Yeah, so you can go that way. The other thing that you can do if you're completely at a loss, and I know, Roy, who taught me this, would say don't do it, but sometimes you just got to cheat, right? So sometimes what you do is you say, what's just a character I really like that doesn't feel totally incongruent, and decide that you want to make your business brand really kind of mirror that character. So you can model the character, and as long as it isn't incongruent. Where mistakes happen is when it's totally incongruent. But if you say, you know what, we've got kind of a young, snarky, sarcastic brand, and I really always loved Calvin and Hobbes, and so I'm going to use Calvin as my character, and I'm going to plot Calvin's character, like what's his thing, plot all the things, be like, okay, can we adopt this? So you can go that way. The point is, if you want to have a brand, it's not just a logo, or it's not just a style guide. If you want to have a brand, it needs to have a soul, which means it needs to be human, right? And some of the most human characters are fictional. So a brand is a fictional entity. Character Diamond is a phenomenal framework to work from. And then once you've established that, now it can stand alone and it can have a voice.
Right.
Anybody can write copy.
And one of the things you said today, which is really powerful, is that you have to be, that digital advertising and digital marketing is a double-edged sword, because if you do really well at digital marketing, but you're sending out the wrong message or you're amplifying the wrong thing, you're just losing more.
Yeah, it's just, you said it's amplification, right? It's like alcohol, right? I'm sure you got friends, there's different people. If you're kind of nice, you drink a lot, you're a happy drunk. People who are kind of assholes, they drink too much, they become angry. That's not cool. Money is an amplifier, right? There's lots of businesses, they raise money, they raise a lot of money, and it accelerates their demise. Why? They just poured fuel. These things, marketing, awareness, it's rocket fuel, right? Rocket fuel, when it's put into a rocket that's well engineered, you're going to the moon. Rocket fuel put in a rocket that's springing a leak, it's going to blow up, and not in a good way.
Or worse, just an oil can. That like is painted like a rocket, but it's not actually a rocket.
Yeah,
so that's the importance of getting the message right first.
You have to get the message, and I think this is the thing that I see most digital marketers make the mistake on, is they dive first into the tactics. They want to know, how do I run a Facebook ad? Okay. I can show you tactically how to do it. There's YouTube videos on how to do it. The question is, what you going to say? Are you the dog that catches the car? Yay, I ran a Facebook ad. What does it say? Oh, crap, right? I mean, you're the single guy who finally worked up the courage to to go to the club, and you have no idea what you're going to say when you get there, right? But you look nice. You combed your hair and brushed your teeth and all that, and you bought a new shirt. You don't know what you're going to say, though. So the message is still preeminent in all marketing. Digital marketing did not change that. Digital marketing did not remove the need for a message that's going to make people go, whoa, I want that. So you still have to be good at that. And the idea of the big idea still exists, and ensuring that you have consistency amongst your messages, a consistency of voice, tone. That's where the character diamond's also going to play in.
Cool. So once you have a solid message, what are things that small businesses, maybe you're just starting to dabble into digital advertising, maybe you're advertising on Instagram a little bit, that's where your fans are, or you've run campaigns in the past and haven't really succeeded. So what are some tips and some tactics that you've seen work for people to get started?
Yeah, well, I'll start with what doesn't work that I see a lot of people do.
Okay.
Which is they'll come up with what they believe is their unique selling proposition. They'll decide we're really good. We've got this feature, we've got this thing, and it's better than the competition, and we're just gonna yell it from the rooftops. We're gonna do a demo. We're gonna show how much better our thing is, and that's the equivalent of being an attractive guy who's drives a nice car, walking into a club and walking in, swinging the door up and being like, ladies, you're welcome. I've arrived, right? And it was like, okay, who are you, right? We got to remember that this is still romance. Marketing is romance. Marketing is dating. And so the mistake that I see people make is they project the message. They amplify the message that they want to tell. They don't go and sidle up next to people who are having a conversation and engage with that existing conversation. So that's a warm, broad, fuzzy way of doing it. But what's a tactical thing that you can do? I tell people all the time, just start answering questions. Go out there. I've known a lot of different businesses. I've launched a bunch of different companies. The example I give a bunch of times is Jason Lemkin, who has the SaaStr site, which is a site that really is all for SaaS companies, technology companies. Even if you're not a tech company, though, watch what he's doing, because all he's doing is answering questions. His content is answering questions. So if you're wondering, exactly when should I hire a VP of sales? That's a question. How do I know when's the right time to hire a VP of sales? He'll tell you. You should hire a VP of sales when you have made 10 unaffiliated sales yourself and have seen 2 salespeople be effective.
Sure.
What's your next question?
Right.
So this idea of answering very specific questions, coming down to earth and answering those specific questions, then once you've done that, then you've earned the right to say, by the way, if you're asking that question, you might need this thing over here.
Right.
And I don't see and anybody could do this. I don't care if you're a carpet cleaner.
Yeah, that doesn't work just for, software businesses, right? So there's this, as I was talking to Roy earlier, I make and restore guitars. That's one of the things I love to do.
Yeah.
And there's this site called Stuart McDonald, and they are a kind of a niche luthiery tool site, which is to make guitars, you need very specific tools. And there's this guy, Dan Earlywine, who's kind of looks like your grandpa, who's has these videos where he answers questions and teaches you how to make guitars, and he features the tools that they sell on this website, and they get a ton of views, and they've done a really good job at this. So I just want to highlight that it's not just for things like how to do abstract software business concepts. It can work for anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've seen, if you're a carpet cleaner, and people are wondering how do you get a particular spot out, show people how to get the spot out. Just because you showed them how to get a spot out of their carpet, that doesn't mean they're going to be like, well, I never need a carpet cleaner again. That person was helpful. The next time I need to get my carpets clean, I'm going to call them, right? So there is something truly magical and powerful about answering people's questions. And so that's what I encourage people to do. It's the simplest content marketing awareness strategy. And, once you have done that, then people wonder, wait, who are you? You just, wow, that was great. Thank you. That was very helpful.
Right.
Who are you again? Oh, I'm, Bob, and this is what we sell.
And then you can have this, kind of continual opt-in, mutual opt-in of escalating the relationship from I just got to know you to being a full customer, right? Instead of, so I made this mistake for years for my business where I would say hey, come check it out, buy. It's
right.
great. It's great.
Yeah.
Look, And then
Yeah, you and me both.
Yeah, and you taught me a lot before we actually met in person through your courses with Digital Marketer about the idea of a tripwire, which is a lower priced item where you deliver an outsized amount of value. So then you go from this answering a question to selling something that delivers an outsized amount of value. And then that escalates a relationship to where people are saying like, oh, I can trust what this person is selling me. And then that changes the conversation from being a prospect to being a customer.
Yeah, it's dating, right? I mean, you don't meet somebody and be like, hey, nice to meet you. By the way, I'm going to Cancun this weekend. Want to go with me, right? I mean, I guess if somebody is like...
Some people do that.
Yeah, some people do that.
I know some people.
I certainly couldn't pull that off, and I don't know if I would necessarily want to... I don't know. I don't want to get into all judgy about it, but generally, that's not going to go down. Like, generally, it's going to be like, oh, this is really nice to meet you. Have a conversation. What are you doing on Thursday? You want to go grab coffee, right? So many businesses, if they would just identify what is there, hey, let's go grab coffee. If they would just identify that, because it's almost never what's at the top of their homepage. It's almost never what they're talking about in their advertising. It's almost never what salespeople are bringing up in the first conversation, right? It's almost never the case. They're almost always like, hey, want to go to Cancun? Hey, want to go back to my place to get freaky? It's almost something that is the business equivalent of that, and they're wondering why their conversion rates are so low. Your conversion rates are so low because you're proposing marriage on a first date. That's why it's low. That's why it's low. And if you find that your conversion rates are low, it generally means you're asking too much. A lot of people want to blame it on, oh, I just need a better target. What we need to do is we need to make sure that the only people who show up, are the people who are ready to buy now. Okay, that sounds good in principle. It's just not how the world works. And that's not how it goes. Like, I don't want to talk to you until you're absolutely positively ready to give me money. What relationship in your life do you have that functions that way that you actually enjoy?
Right.
Show up. Be there early, answer some questions. At the end, be like, by the way, if you're asking questions about this, it probably means that you're this type of person. If you are, we help those kind of people all day long. Right. And so if we can be a service, let us know. Here's our site. You might answer 10 questions before somebody goes, I'm just going to get them to do this for me. Right.
So you could answer questions and even post like a 1-minute video on Instagram about it, right?
Yeah.
And make that an app.
The channel is kind of irrelevant. Right. I mean, it matters in that you need to do it, but whether you're posting the video on, LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram or YouTube, heck, you could send the same video out to your email list, not in the email itself, obviously, linking off to one of those areas. But yeah, the idea is you want to put the content in as many places as you want because you want to be where they are. You want to be where your customers are. And so if they're everywhere, you kind of need to be there as well, to an extent. You don't want to divide your efforts too much. You want to be certainly where the bulk of them are.
How do you figure out what is the best channel for you to spend your advertising dollars? Let's say you have your story. You realize that you want to do videos. Videos could go on YouTube, but not necessarily. It could go on many other channels. How do you figure out what is the best channel for your business?
The two King Kongs are still, Google and Facebook. They represent over 80% of all digital ad spend, right? So generally, if you want to actually have something that, and they both are really simple and easy to get started in, they're self-serve. You can start with a few $100. On a test, and if it works, you can scale it almost infinitely. So Google and Facebook are great if it's working. If it's working in Google, and you have different videos that are working, you can also do YouTube. YouTube is owned by Google, so it's managed through the same ad platform. Similarly, Instagram being owned by Facebook, in those two ad platforms, Facebook and Google, you can advertise to 4 different channels that happen to be the 4 most prominent channels out there: Google, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. So that's where I would start. And I guess when you've exhausted your budget, that's when you can look to expand beyond that. But that's going to take a little time.
Sounds good. We have a couple questions that we ask every guest. And digital marketer can no longer really be considered a small business, but it was at one point.
Sure.
How many employees you guys have in Austin now?
Well, digital marketer is 55. So, okay. I think by some standards, they would consider it a small business. But
sure.
Yeah.
But can you think of a time when things went really wrong, and what did you do about it?
I think lots of times when things went really wrong. When I was first starting my business before digital marketer was a thing, I was chasing Google algorithms, and sometimes I was right and sometimes I was wrong. I remember when the Florida update happened, And I mean, I'm sure a lot of people, you feel free to Google it. It was the first really, really significant algorithm shift that Google did that just overnight the rankings changed for everybody. And I went from having tons of organic to like none. I went from making lots of money to making like none. But I still had all the bills. So I was like, I need to figure out the ad side, and I'm going to do this. And I was mad, and I'm going to optimize and paying all these people. I got $250,000 worth of debt.
Wow.
$250,000 worth of debt. 24,
so you've been tinkering with digital advertising for a long time.
I made my first sale online when I was 19 years old from my college dorm room. So yeah, this is the only thing I've really ever done in my adult life.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I got $250,000 in debt. I was able to dig myself out of that hole. I eventually figured it out, leaned up.
That must have been terrifying.
It was absolutely terrifying. I mean, and I just got married. And so I was afraid that, I was scared to tell my wife that, within the first year and a half of us being married, I managed to get us in $250,000 of debt.
Hey, honey, surprise.
Yeah, and I didn't tell her. I didn't. I should have. I was scared to tell her. I was like, it's okay. I can fix this. That, by the way, is how you get yourself in worse trouble. Thank God. Didn't happen. The way, by the way, I got out of that mess was I didn't pay taxes. So fast forward 2 years, right? And I finally have dug myself out of that hole, but I really didn't pay any taxes. So now all of a sudden, I get this thing from my accountant saying that I owe the IRS $250,000. Again, the number is always $250,000. And I got the call on a Sunday night. I now know, by the way, it's a bad thing when your accountant calls you on a Sunday night.
Yep.
It's especially bad when they call you on a Sunday night and April 15th, tax day is on Thursday.
Yep.
So he's like, I hope you've got this set aside, but this is what you owe. I was like, I definitely don't have it. And that was really the first time I can remember my adult life crying. I mean, I sat on the couch and cried. My wife sitting next to me, and she's like, I just remember she's like, it's okay. You'll figure something out. You always do. And then she went to bed. Like, that's cold, woman.
There's a bottle of wine.
Yeah, and she's like, I trust you. And I remember I asked her, I said, can I please just have 24 hours to mope and feel sorry? And she said I could have 24 hours. She's like, but then you got to get to work, figure this out. And so Monday I got to work. And I created a number of offers. Thankfully, I did have some businesses that were working, and I pulled an all-nighter and created 6 different offers for 6 different businesses. We had email lists, and I figured out how to do some solid email marketing efforts. I sold stuff at rock bottom prices that I shouldn't have sold it for. I mean, I've just about obliterated certain brands and things by doing it, but had to do it, and by the time Thursday rolled around, I generated enough in cash to not only pay the $250,000, but also to pay the taxes on the $250,000 that I had just generated.
Jesus.
So I made all this money, sent it to the IRS, and I was broke. And it was the greatest feeling in the world, because It was the first time that I finally didn't owe anybody anything. And kind of the lesson that I learned from that is cash flow management. I think it's actually more important than even being a good marketer in terms of business, right? Marketing is up there. You got to know how to sell stuff. You got to know how to make the cash register ring.
You said a great thing earlier in a conversation over lunch, I think it was, where you said and I've heard this before, the number one job of a business owner or a CEO is for the business not to run out of cash.
We tell, now thankfully, our portfolio of companies is fairly diverse. And so I get to work with a lot of smart people who are the operators behind this. I kind of get to sit in a board and advisory type role. But I tell them, look, you got 2 main jobs: hire, train, and retain the best people, and don't churn talent. But more importantly, don't run out of money. All right, don't run out of money. When you run out of money, you run out of options. When you run out of money, you run out of fuel. You're dead. You're sitting on the side of the road, and so, being able to, having a clear sense of where's your cash flow going, where's the money going, signing every check in the early days.
As long as you got enough cash, and you got there's a famous poker player, and I forget what his name was, that said all you need is a chip and a seat.
Yeah.
If you got the chip,
you got a shot.
Yeah.
You got a shot. You may not win, but at least you got a shot. And that's all everyone is, options. I like to think, give me enough swings, I'm gonna get a hit. So that's kind of where I've always believed.
Wow. What is the number one piece of advice you would give to somebody who is considering starting their business, or maybe who is in the middle struggling or in the throes of having their business? What's the number one piece of advice that you would give them?
Simplify. Every time in my entrepreneurial career, when things were bad, when things went sideways, it's when I overcomplicated the business. So the exercise that I run And I've had to go through this thought experiment because a couple times I thought it was going to happen. And that is zero basis everything. Tell yourself, okay, you're at a bankruptcy auction and it's your business that's on the auction block because you went bankrupt. There's people out there who are going to buy it. If they were to buy your business out of bankruptcy, there's no more fixed costs, there's no more anything, a clean start, a clean break. What would they keep? What would they cast aside? If you had the opportunity to buy your own business out of bankruptcy, could start all over again, what would you keep doing? What would you cast aside? In my experience, entrepreneurs know in their heart of hearts the decisions they need to make, but they're painful. And two things that impact them more than anything else. The first is sunk cost bias. So I've already tried so much, like, we've invested so much in this, we got to see it through. No, you don't. You don't. Sometimes you don't. You just set it aside. You say, we're going to stop investing in this. Rarely does that mean, by the way, that you're taking that idea and just killing it. Oftentimes, you're just putting it on a back burner. You're putting it on the shelf. I've had ideas that we've stopped and went back years later and said, let's give that a go again. You know what? Usually they still don't work. But that's, you got to look and say, set sunk cost bias aside. And the other thing that you need to do is say, is set aside the relationship aspect of it. And this one hurts the most. Very often there are people in your company who aren't the people who are going to be able to get it done, and they're dragging the business down, and you just don't want to have the hard conversation. Mm-hmm. If you're buying it out of bankruptcy, those people are already out of a job. So I asked myself, if I were starting it over today, buying out of bankruptcy, who would I instantly run to and say, please don't take any work anywhere else. Please stay here. We got enough. It's fine. I got you. Who would I do that to? What divisions, what product lines, what things would I keep? Who are the people I would gratefully let walk away and be like, oh, I'm so sorry it didn't work out. Love you, love you, love you. That's the thing, especially if you're in a tough spot. You got to zero basis your decision. Put yourself in that situation. Again, I thought I was going there a couple of times. I thought I was going to have to file bankruptcy. Mm-hmm. So I had to think. And I remember I asked myself, what would I do if I were buying this out of bankruptcy? What decisions would I make? And I just went and did those things. Mm-hmm. And it worked out. And it's amazing the clarity that thought experiment will give you. So I just encourage people to do that.
That's awesome. Where can people find you? So I will say that I found you originally through a podcast, and I followed your napkin business plan. What's the official name of it? It's the
$1 million napkin.
Yeah, the $1 million napkin. So if you Google your name, Ryan Deiss, Ryan Deiss, $1 million napkin, that'll show up.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I've written some stuff on it. That's an old school thing, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah. That was that's a great. I mean, it's beyond the scope of what we can accurately describe here, but it's an amazing way to think about your business.
A forthcoming book, by the way.
Is that right?
Yeah. There's going to be a book called The $1 Million Napkin. Yeah.
Okay.
So
yeah, it changed my life for sure. So where can people find you if people are interested in learning more about all these things we talked about?
Yeah, digitalmarketer.com. I would sign up for our list, and there's so much great content there. You mentioned the Perpetual Traffic podcast, I believe. So the Perpetual Traffic podcast is one of the podcasts that we have. We also have a podcast at Digital. So if you love podcasts, we got lots of marketing related podcasts. I gotta tell you though, it's not gonna be a lot of me that you're necessarily seeing because we're a team. And I'm not in the trenches always doing the marketing, right? I'm running the company. So, you go to Digital Marketer, you're going to see content and faces. You have an
interesting cast of characters, like the Richard Lindner with his email stuff.
Oh yeah,
Perry Belcher gets up there,
and says God knows what. Yeah, no, it's fun, right? And I think to me it's just more honest, right? I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know all this stuff. I mean, I get it, but in general, I got the best job in the world. I'm surrounded by smart people who let me take credit for all their ideas. Yeah. So go to digitalmarketer.com and you'll get you'll get it from the horse's mouth, from the people who are in the trenches.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom on Small Business War Stories today, and look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. Small Business War Stories. Small businesses are the soul of America. And this is where they tell their stories. I am your host, Pablo Fuentes.